The police station was just as Troy remembered it. It stank of some odd and unidentifiable stench that always made his nostrils flare. And the hum of constant noise, talking and arguing filled the air, and the waft of cigarette smoke hung over the offices. A woman was sitting at the front desk near the door. She had curly white hair and an aged face, with large glasses over her eyes that made her eyes look bigger than they actually were. She glanced up from her clipboard of notes and saw James Troy walking towards her. She nearly dropped what she was holding in surprise. "James," she cried in a hushed voice that showed a lifetime of smoking behind it. It's a shame. If Linda had stopped smoking years ago, she might look more like a 56-year-old woman instead of a 70-year-old one. "Hey, Linda," he remarked. "Not here for pleasure, I'm afraid." He took off his hat as he approached her, and she smiled meekly at the joke. "When do you ever come here for pleasure? This was always a job for you. A chore, I'd say," she scoffed. She wasn't wrong. James never took pleasure in his kind of work when he was a detective. He did it because it was his duty, his job, and his privilege, but it was never for fun. Fighting his way through red tape and protocol, being pulled off cases and shoved into new ones for the sake of the media and for covering up the department's ass. None of it was pleasure. He'd hated it. Hated it for every godforsaken day he'd been a detective. At least as a beat cop, the job was simple. You catch a bad guy, make the public feel safe, and then turn them in. He thought, as a detective, you got to at least do more investigative work. And sure, that was part of it. There was so much more baggage he simply didn't have time or patience to deal with. He told Linda all this before, and whether or not she understood or cared about any of it was her problem, not his. "Yeah, it was definitely a job, and we'll leave it at that," he remarked. "I'm in a bit of a hurry today, Linda. I need information on a case from last year." "That would be in archives, and surely you don't need me to show you the way," she rolled her eyes. "I'm not a cop anymore, Linda. They aren't just going to let me waltz downstairs and look through old cases," James growled darkly. Linda sighed and leaned her head on her hand in a coy manner. "And you want little old me to go down and get it for you. I like this job, James. I'm not getting fired for you." "I'm not asking you to break any rules, Linda. I just want to know who was on the case I'm looking for." Linda sighed long and shook her head. She then pushed her chair back with a slow cough and stood up, brushing off her flowery dress. "I'll take a look into the case, officer, at least." "Which one?" "The Franklin and Emily Frost murder," Troy pressed. Linda's eyes widened a moment. "I remember that one. Hold on, I'll be right back." She hurried away, her heels clicking on the tile floor as James sat down on a wooden bench and waited, his hat in his lap. His eyes narrowed as she walked away, and his mind began racing. Elizabeth Frost, a simple cabaret singer? No, she was more than that. She had a shrewd and cold demeanor like her namesake. She kept everything at a certain distance out of distrust and out of some sense of self-preservation, meaning she was used to being around untrustworthy people like criminals. She probably had a record, and if she did, that would explain her distrust of police. But what had she done beforehand? Her father had been a simple factory worker, but he'd also been shot at a public theater. That's not just a factory dispute, that's cold execution. He'd done something, or he knew something, and someone made an example out of him. Was it something to do with Elizabeth herself? And why couldn't the police find any leads? Any open killing like that had to have had witnesses, evidence, shell casings, anything to connect the killer to the crime. He tried hard to think of the puzzle pieces missing, but his heart kept dragging his mind back to Elizabeth and her warm smile. Those stunning eyes that seemed to draw him in like... "Stop it, Troy," he growled to himself, rubbing the image from his mind. "She's dangerous. I can't say how, but that woman." He sighed and turned his eyes to the window that looked outside. Rain was pattering down, turning the sky a thin shade of gray, and the air cooled considerably. Just another dreary day in the city. The clicking of heels informed Troy that Linda was back. He stood as she approached, holding a folder of papers and photos. "No one was in the room, so I snatched this," she hissed, shoving it in Troy's hands. "If anyone asked, you snuck past me and stole it." "I'll think of something to say," Troy agreed absently as he opened the case folder and paged through it. Autopsy reports, photos of the crime scene, pictures of the victims, and the detective in charge of the case. Arnold Moore. Moore had the case, Troy asked skeptically. Arnold Moore was just a rookie when James left the force. He'd been in the narcotics division, though most who knew him knew he'd wanted to go into homicide. Troy hadn't paid him much attention while on the job, but he never thought of him as much more than a pencil pusher anyway. Arnold didn't stand out, and he didn't have and he wasn't very bright for a detective, often missing obvious clues or evidence that a beat cop could have picked out quickly. Arnold also had a bad habit of rushing to judgments way too quickly without considering the fuller picture. In this Troy is the habit of a lazy individual. Not very good detective material. He was promoted not long after you quit, Linda explained. Chief gave him a commendation for blowing open an illegal gun-running gang outside of town. What, did he trip and stumble on it? Troy scoffed. I'm just surprised he's still alive to brag about it, Linda grumbled. Wish he'd eaten a bullet. There's just no living with him now. He can't shut up about one big win. Is he here now? Troy asked. At his desk, I think, Linda answered. But again, you didn't hear any of this from me, she insisted. Noted, he replied with a smirk. He walked past her holding the file in his coat so it wasn't easily visible, and then strolled down the hallway into his old romping ground, the Homicide Division office. Inside he saw a few familiar faces, some new ones, some who recognized him, and others who didn't seem to care who he was. Troy didn't bother looking any of them over. He was on the hunt for one man, and he found him. A pudgy fellow, Arnold Moore gave off the air of a man who was always waiting to let out a very uncivilized belch. His jowls were almost set and floppy, and his clean-shaven face gave him the unmistakable visage of an infant who was too swollen. He had dark hair matted to his head and a dark, reflective eyes that held the anxiety of a rodent, like he was looking for a morsel to attack or a hideaway to sink behind. He looked up at Troy's approach, thought a moment, and then decided to smile. Well, if it isn't the famous James Troy, standing up to shake Troy's hand as Troy took it, smiling. What brings you back here? I had a few questions for you, Moore, James said darkly, trying to mask any accusation in his voice. You worked a case last year, and I was curious about your conclusions. Moore couldn't be bothered to hide the satisfaction on his face. Sure thing. Anything to help, he said proudly. The Franklin and Emily Frost case, you were the lead detective? Whatever Troy was expecting from Moore, what he got was not it. Moore's confident grin suddenly vanished, replaced with a serious, even nervous expression. He coughed and adjusted his coat, trying and failing to mask his discomfort. Yes, come to think of it. Double homicide outside the movie theater on Who Did It, Arnold? James hissed darkly, putting more pressure on the flustered detective. Your case came up empty, but there's no way in hell an open execution like that could leave nothing for you to find or tie anything to. Moore's eyes darted around a bit, and his posture became defensive. Well, all due respect, what would you know about it? You're a detective who walked out of the job he was asked to do. And you're a beat cop in a fancy suit, James challenged right back. Either you know who killed these two, or you're too stupid to solve an open and shut case. The two glared furiously at each other for a few long moments, drawing the eyes of everyone in the room. Meet me in the lockers, Moore snarled. He then stood up and marched away to the locker rooms with Troy right behind him. The locker area was where the officers kept their equipment and personal items while on and off the clock. Troy never liked it back here, always smelling of bleach, and it made his skin itch for some reason. He resisted the urge to scratch himself as Moore followed him inside, and after slamming the door behind him, Troy shot him a menacing glare that Moore tried to respond with but couldn't quite match. So you're calling me out, Troy? What gives some former cop the right to even question my record? Anyone with two eyes can see you're either corrupt or stupid, Moore. Maybe both, but I'm not real interested either way. All I want to know is who killed Franklin and Emily Frost. Outside the movie theater, that night, who were the witnesses? Where's the ballistics? Anything more! There wasn't enough to pin anyone on the crime. Trail's dead, as I said in my report. You're clearly holding it, Moore challenged. If you want to reopen the case yourself, then go get your old job back and maybe work for the cold case department. Let me rephrase this, you fat bastard, Troy snarled, slamming his fist so hard against the locker it made his hand bleed slightly. I told you, I'm not interested whether you're corrupt or stupid, but if you don't give me what I need for this case, you're my next one. I'll dig so deep into your closet, the skeletons I find will fill a graveyard. I'll find every dirty deal, every pornographic magazine, every affair with your wife, every laundered dollar bill you pushed under the table, and every case you ever botched for the sake of your own worthless skin. I'll drag it out for the open for everyone to see and make sure the headline of the next paper reads, Hero Detective Revealed to be a Lying Asshole. You'll lose more than your job, Arnold. Your reputation will be shot. And if there are any people you work for outside the department, certain people you don't want me knowing about, I'm sure they'll be quite upset with what I dig up. You sure you want them coming after you? With each word I said, Moore turned a different shade of purple, red, and even white. He was stammering to find some kind of comeback, some sort of argument. But all I could mutter was, The hell do you think you are? You wouldn't dare. You're a piss-poor detective and an even worse liar, Troy hissed. But like I said, I don't care about your under-the-table dealings or closet skeletons unless you make me care. So you better focus my attention someplace else and fast before I start hunting, and I won't be quiet about it. Arnold Moore fumed and paced a moment, biting his lip and trying hard to think of something to say, but finally gave a long sigh of defeat and shook his head. Is this what you do, James? He asked darkly. You take some kind of sick pleasure in abusing people when you don't get your way? My way, James snarled. My way? Troy moved so fast Moore could only squeal when Troy grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and slammed him into a locker. A girl's parents were gunned down in the street, and you're worried about me getting in your way? Do you have any shame in that waste of flesh of yours at all? It's business, Troy. It's always about business. With the depression, the stock market, we all gotta make money somehow, so just turn a blind eye and happily take a few dollars for your ignorance. Troy bit on the words like they were sour candy. Arnold Moore deflated and nodded. I'm not proud of it, James, but your shame sure didn't stop you. If you had any self-respect, you'd resign with what little dignity you have left. I know you won't. You're not nearly that noble. Troy shoved him back and stepped away. Now who? Give me a name! Arnold Moore looked down at his feet, or perhaps his belly. It was hard to tell if he could even see past it. Won't make any difference, he grumbled. You're not a cop, and the police aren't going to waste resources opening wounds with this guy. Not with an economy like this. Maybe not. But it'll give the victims closure. And that was always the point, Arnold. That's why I became a cop. Troy responded coldly. Yeah, you really believe that too, don't you? Arnold scoffed. Shows why you couldn't handle working here. The world just don't work that way anymore, James. Yeah, you're right. But I'll die with my conscience clear. Last chance, Moore. The name.